Now we have Mary Altman, our senior editor for Casablanca. Mary discovered romance in the 4th grade when her best friend smuggled a copy of A Knight in Shining Armor to the lunchroom, and she's been a convert ever since. A giant and unrepentant nerd, Mary spends her free time playing video games and watching Critical Role with her longtime partner. She started her post-college life studying law before coming to her senses and settling happily into a decade-long editorial career, and we are so happy she made that decision. Mary will be interviewing Ronnie Lauren. Ronnie wrote her first romance novel at age 15 when she discovered writing about boys was way easier than actually talking to them. Agreed. Since then, her flirting skills haven't improved, but she likes to think her storytelling ability has. She holds a master's degree in social work and spent years as a mental health counselor, but now she writes full-time from her cozy office in Dallas, Texas, where she puts her characters on the therapy couch instead. She is a 2-time Rita Award winner and a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author. Visit her online at ronnielauren.com. Mary and Lauren, we're ready to hear about romance.
Hi, Ronnie. It's so good to see you.
Hi, it's good to see you too.
It's exciting to be here talking romance for everyone. I don't think I ever actually told you the story of what happened the first time we read The Ones Who Got Away. Basically, the Romance Acquisitions team has something that we lovingly call a rampage, where we all gather together and read like different submissions and books we're really interested in. And it's a really kind of raucous event, and we're like chatting with each other and like throwing out ideas, throwing out thoughts. And then The Ones Who Got Away came up, and we all kind of settled in, and silence fell as we started reading, and the entire room went completely quiet, and minutes were passing and it was still silent, and no one was saying a word, and then suddenly the EA who's sitting next to me just reaches over and just starts rubbing her arms because she's got goose flesh. And like that's the moment I realized I also had goose flesh. And I look over and our other editor was also rubbing her arm. Like all of us at one time were just feeling this overwhelming moment with this book. And we looked at each other and like one of us actually whispered, "We have to buy this book."
I'm so glad y'all did. Thank you.
So in The Ones Who Got Away, it features several different people who survive a school shooting and they continue to experience the aftermath of that as they grow into the adults. Can you talk about your inspiration for the series?
Sure. Yeah, I read a lot of nonfiction. So in the mix of all of my books that I read, I love just picking up random nonfiction. And I had picked up Columbine probably 2 years before this book was, my book was published. And I read the story, and Columbine happened in 1999. I graduated in 97. So I was kind of like that generation right before we had to worry about that. I mean, not that there weren't school shootings, but nothing on that level. And so it got me to thinking like, in news stories, we see this little piece of the news story. We see these, victims and all of that for a week or two or whatever it is. And then like we move on to the next news story. And so when I read that book, I was like, what happens when you've gone through that? And then you have to go forward in your life. How do you recover? How do you deal with the trauma of it? And then the world has kind of moved on, without you, and you're left with all of this tragedy, which doesn't sound like the start of a romance series, I know. Which is why I love source books, because when I was shopping that series, I was also shopping a more traditional series, but I really, really wanted to write this one. But I'm like, I know it's a weird concept to take something so dark and put it in romance, but y'all completely understood what I was trying to get and like got it. And so I was so excited to be able to write it because I think because of my mental health counselor background and all of that, like I need characters that have really kind of meaty backstories and have to overcome a lot. I don't write fluffy stories. I love reading fluffy stories, but I can't seem to write one even when I try. So this was a good concept for me, I think, to have 4 books to dig into each woman's different story, and everybody had a different experience, even though it was the same event. So everybody perceives it differently. Everybody was at a different point in the story, what their trauma was like. So it gave me a lot to work with, through 4 books.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the other series because we also looked at that one and also loved it because everything you do, you bring so much depth to your characters, to your writing. But it was the Ones Who Got Away that like really shook us essentially because all of us have experienced kind of ripples of this kind of trauma, whether it's not like specifically the school shooting, but
Mhm.
some kind of trauma in our lives that affect us or affect our loved ones, and like how we kind of deal with that as people. And when we brought it to the acquisitions team and to the meeting with our publisher, all of us were kind of like ready to do battle and ready to like fight to the death to have this book. And we had like all of our comments lined up and we had our arguments, and it took 2 minutes before our publisher was like, yes, whatever it takes, buy this book. Sourcebooks is the place for this, and Sourcebooks is the home for this wonderful series. So like it's really the characters of that made this like, you've got to get this book. Is there a character from the ones who got away that you relate to more than any of the others?
Probably Rebecca, who is the heroine of the second book, which is, I did bring them, but is the one you can't forget. She is the straight A student, uptight, kind of quiet, like the boy from afar, but didn't actually tell him. As you can, if you look in behind my office, you know, I'm the girl with the Kanban board and like the 3 planners in front of me and like very just, you know, organized and high strung. And so I think Rebecca and I would get along. But yeah, I like writing characters that are very much not like me, but every now and then there's one that's like, oh yeah, we would have been friends in school. So I would say her for sure.
I pretty much loved every single character, but out of all the characters you've written, I think the one that really resonated the most with me was from your upcoming book, Yes and I Love You.
Mhm.
Holland Tate, I saw a lot of myself in her. Growing up, I had a speech impediment, and I was really self-conscious of that, and I was really self-conscious of how I presented myself to the world. And I kind of like walled myself off behind books at the time. And so seeing Holland and seeing how she's kind of dealing with her own anxiety and issues, how she's using Miss Poppy as kind of her wall against the world, I just saw so much of myself. And I really think that's the magic of your books. So with Yes and I Love You, which is coming out March 2021, it really feels like a departure from the ones who got away, even though it shares that like deep emotional DNA. Can you talk about how this book may be different from your previous series and what really excites you about going in this new direction?
Yeah, I feel like all of my books, even because I started in erotic romance, so I've come kind of on this journey, but I feel like they all have the root of characters with really, you know, deep backstories, and it's very character driven. So Yes and I Love You is, you know, sticking with that in some sense, but I feel like it kind of winks to women's fiction a little bit more. Even though it's solidly a romance, it's very much Holland's journey about, she has Tourette's, so she is very socially anxious because of it. And I have someone with tic disorder in my family, so I'm very familiar with, you know, the kind of how that can be a struggle. And so I wanted to really focus in on her story, even though the hero plays a big part. She has to go on her own journey. And the hero is an improv actor. So I thought, if you're socially anxious, which I happen to be socially anxious, so I can relate to this, what would be the worst thing that I would have to do? And the thought of improv scares the hell out of me. So I'm like, I'm going to give her a hero who's an improv actor and who's going to, you know, encourage her to get over her social anxiety and work through it with him doing improv. So it was a lot of fun to kind of put her in those situations and see, you know, how he took care of her a little bit, because, you know, I didn't want her to be forced into, you have to be on stage right now, because as someone who would be forced on stage, that would be a nightmare. So he really gives her an opportunity to do it kind of in a private way with him and learning her own confidence. But so I think it differs in the fact that it's very much about her journey, but always, I don't know if I'll ever write a book that doesn't have a love story in it, because I read for happy endings and I like to write those. So